Hello, you are listening to the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer and Amazon #1 best-selling author. You can find out more about me and my work at catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. While you're there, sign up for my newsletter and find out even more information about how you can heal yourself naturally. Now, our guest today is Corinne Zupko. Corinne is a licensed counselor and mindfulness-based stress reduction teacher. She is the author of the wonderful book, From Anxiety to Love, and you can find out more about her and her work at www.FromAnxietyToLove.com. Welcome, Corinne Zupko.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here with you today.
Now, the subtitle for your book is A Radical New Approach for Letting Go of Fear and Finding Lasting Peace. So, Corinne, what inspired you to write From Anxiety to Love?
Well, I was inspired to write this book because of my own journey through lifelong anxiety issues. I feel like I was pretty much born with anxiety. Anxiety is something that runs in my family. I received my first psychiatric diagnosis at the age of 2. That was separation anxiety disorder. My poor mother couldn't leave the room without me screaming my head off. And I was just always troubled by a lot of phobias and fears and worries. And when I got to college, I broke down with debilitating anxiety and panic attacks. Those college years are a time when mental health issues surface for a lot of people, and I was no exception. And it was through my issues with anxiety that I was led to a spiritual pathway. And the more I dove into developing this deep connection with my capital S self, my source, love, whatever you want to call it, God, the more my anxiety fell away. And so the book really comprises the approach that I used. It's based on the metaphysical text, A Course in Miracles, which is what the spiritual pathway was that I was introduced to that helped me so much. My most recent anxiety episode was back in 2009, and I remember it feeling actually worse than the time that I had gone through in college. It felt like the anxiety was even more intense and more debilitating. And at that point, I had already had over a decade of studying A Course in Miracles under my belt, but I had realized at that time that I had kind of been using my spiritual practice as a Band-Aid rather than actually transform. I would kind of just run to it, read something that would make me feel better, put it back down, and then go back to doing what I was doing. And so it was through really deepening my practice at that point that my anxiety issues started falling away. And I started writing, and I knew that I had to write. It was just something that had to come out of me. And what I wrote comprises the pages of this book now. And it's the principles of A Course in Miracles that help me out of anxiety, which is what my book is about.
Oh, that's fabulous. Now let's talk sort of basics for our audience. What is anxiety?
Great question. So anxiety, I believe, exists on a continuum. On the low end of the continuum are the fears, the everyday anxieties and worries that we all struggle with, that all are visited by. On the high end of the continuum is more of the debilitating aspect of anxiety that I referenced with where I spent a lot of my life. That anxiety tends to be really intense. It can be very overwhelming. It can feel, in the midst of a panic attack, it feels like you're just going to die. It feels like this, overwhelming sense of doom and dread has just come over you. And I would experience shaking and just breaking out in sweats and my heart racing. It was very scary, especially the first time, because I didn't know what was happening. So anxiety can be linked oftentimes to a fear of what's going to be happening in the future, the what ifs. What if this happens? What if that happens? Although it certainly can be triggered by things that we've gone through in the past, like traumas and things like that.
Yeah, great insights. And from my perspective as a medical intuitive, I will say a couple things. From a brain perspective, anxiety happens when we're stuck in the left side of the brain. So the left side of your brain is the detail part. It's the part, don't forget the milk, don't forget the milk, don't forget the milk, don't forget the milk. It's the part that's, just repetitively banging on you. Also, anxiety can happen from low brain chemistry. So when we're not eating properly, I've helped a lot of people overcome anxiety when just by helping them sort out their diet. And there can be sensitivities to sugar, there can be sensitivities to caffeine. But going back from a brain perspective, when you can integrate your brain, and what that means is when you can get both the right and the left sides of the brain firing together, when you're using the whole brain and getting the big picture as well as the details, then you can calm down. And Corinne, I liked how you talked about it as a continuum. Now, let's talk about the Course in Miracles. For our audience, what is the Course in Miracles?
Great question. So A Course in Miracles is a book. It is a self-study metaphysical text, and the book itself is comprised of 3 parts: a textbook, a workbook, and a manual for teachers. The text is a text. It's theoretical. It can be dense and a little bit difficult to read. If you've ever, opened it up and looked, I actually had someone tell me that they were an English major and that they were sure that they'd probably, because of that, have an easier time understanding it. And then they came back to me and they were like, forget the English major thing. I have no idea what this is talking about. But that's the text. The workbook has a lesson for every single day of the year. So there's 365 lessons. And then the manual for teachers is written in more of almost like a Q&A style. And it's actually much more understandable. So I always recommend for folks who are beginning to start with the workbook and or the manual, because it will go in a little bit easier perhaps than the text. But it is a book. It can be picked up anywhere where books are sold. And it's self-study. So although support groups exist because it's helpful to talk about it, it's something you can just study on your own.
So I just want to point out for our audience, again, we're listening to the Natural Healing Show. This is not per se, A Course in Miracles is not per se a book about physical health. However, when you study it, it does often lead to miracles, to very profound levels of healing. And my understanding, like most people reading it, when I read the Course in Miracles, it's very hard for your ego mind to get, because you read the lesson or you read any part of the Course in Miracles and you go, what did I just read? What did it mean? And to me, it's almost like a Zen koan, because your ego is trying to figure it out. And you can really drive yourself crazy trying to figure it out. And yet at some point, there's a transcendence that happens, and you literally leap through your ego into this deeper understanding. So from your perspective, Corinne, how is A Course in Miracles a text that can actually help people heal naturally?
The Course is all about healing. So it's teaching us that, and this is where the radical piece comes in. This might be, the piece that is a little bit different or a little bit out there, but it's worked for me. It's teaching that everything that we see, including our bodies, is actually a projection coming from our mind. So healing happens at the mind level, which can often result in physical healings or healings of the mind. My issue in life has been anxiety. And because of A Course in Miracles, I no longer experience the level of anxiety that I used to. I'm doing things now, like I'm about to get on a plane on Wednesday. And in the past, years ago, I would have been obsessing about this the moment I bought the ticket. And now it's like, no big deal. I'm just going where I'm called to go. So the experience, the healing can happen in our mind, and that can also sometimes show up in physical healings as well, because it's all about what's going on up here. and clearing out those blocks of fear.
Now, for our listeners at the Natural Healing Show, I'd just like to share my perspective as a medical intuitive healer. So your soul controls your mind. So anytime you work on the soul level, whether it's prayer or meditation or reading spiritual texts such as the Course in Miracles, you're working at the deepest level, any sort of spiritual healing. So your soul controls your mind, and your mind, which consists of your thoughts and your beliefs control your emotions. So whether it's anxiety or depression or just, all the different uncomfortable emotions that we can experience as humans. So your mind controls your emotions. So when you work at this mind level, you're going to be able to shift your emotions. Your emotional body controls your energy body. And your energy body consists of your breath, the acupuncture system, and the chakras, and the energy body controls your physical body. So big picture, when we work on this profound spiritual level, you can have mental healings, emotional healings, energetic clearings, and finally you can clear the physical level. And conversely, by the time you have a physical illness, a physical dis-ease, the energy has come in through the spiritual, through the mental, through the energetic, the emotional, through the energetic, into the physical. So to heal, you've got to move back out that way. You've got to work through the physical, through the energy body, through the emotional, through the mind, and through the spiritual body. So going back to the Course in Miracles, again, what is it about studying the Course in Miracles that allowed you to have this profound transformation that helped you to get over the anxiety?
Well, it's interesting because I can answer that in so many different ways. I love what you just said about the soul controlling the mind, because I've always sort of conceptualized my work with the Course of working with a unconscious part of my mind or soul. And I always sort of envisioned it like, it's not really behind my head, but I'm just putting my hand back here just to, give myself an idea of maybe what's happening. That part of me, from a Course perspective, is either looking toward separation and fear or looking toward love. Now, this is maybe a little bit different than what you're teaching, but it's resonating with me in terms of some of the Course's teachings. I'm learning how that part can look to love again and not be so freaked out and afraid by everything, that I see that could threaten or cause harm, on the outside. So on a very practical level, what has enabled the healing in terms of anxiety for me has been learning that in my mind on a day-to-day basis, there's a voice of fear in my mind, which is this voice of a separate self, a belief in separation from love from one another. Or there is a loving part of my mind. And it's this part of my mind that remembers truth, that remembers, that my soul exists beyond this body. And that on a day-to-day level, I can choose which to listen to. And getting better and better at starting to tune in to that voice of love. As the fear comes up and I turn to that voice of love and I say, help me, I'm willing to see this differently. That part of my mind that remembers love then brings forth experiences that teach me that love is what I am. So in other words, all of that to kind of sum up your question, to answer your question, is that the healing has happened because it's helped me learn that I'm not actually limited to this physical body. I believe I'm in it right now. It's my experience, but I'm actually something much greater. And as I can remember that, and I'm not claiming to stay there or to be there all the time at all, but as I've had glimpses that there is something beyond this world of form, the anxiety has to fall away. Because one of the Course quotes that I love is that perfect love casts out fear. And if fear exists, there's not perfect love. So that fear, it doesn't block the love, it blocks my awareness of the love. And as I can release that fear, that awareness of love's presence has to come forward for me to be aware of again. And that's where the healing happens, and recognizing that, we don't walk alone.
Now, I believe it was Albert Einstein said that the most important question is whether or not you consider the universe to be a friendly place. Because when we have a true knowledge and experience that the universe is a friendly place, then you know that everything that happens is for our highest good, that we are always surrounded by the love, the support, the information, the guidance that we need to heal. Even if it's a phone call, even if it's watching this video or listening to this podcast. Now, going back to the Course in Miracles, because it is a very challenging text, even for highly intelligent people. How did you go about studying the Course in Miracles? Because we can read it on our own, which is always available to us. We can listen to audio, the audio versions of it, and it's available for free online. I think you can go to courseinmiracles.org. Is that correct, or is it acim.org?
It's one of those, or maybe the foundation is FACIM. I'm not exactly sure off the top of my head, but yes, there are audios available online.
Yeah, but if you're in the audience, you can find A Course in Miracles for free online, the entire text, and there's audio versions of it that you can listen to. So big picture, we can listen to it, we can read it, and we can also study it in a group. What is your recommendation about how people can best tackle this material?
I actually recommend an approach of all three. I started in a study group and reading on my own, and I find for myself that when I'm driving, whatever I'm listening to easily goes in. So I had A Course in Miracles on, at that point, it was cassette tapes back in the day. And I would just pop one in and do my drive. And, again, if I wasn't getting every word, it was okay. But there were bits and pieces that would go in, and those bits and pieces would stick, and slowly they'd start to, help me expand my awareness in terms of what the Course was saying a little bit more and a little bit more. And then when you have study groups, it can be really helpful to talk it over with people who have been also studying it for a while. And also, doing it on my own, reading at home. So I kind of feel like you have to find the approach that works best for you. For me, I was doing it all, but I'm glad that you brought up that it's on audio, because I found that extremely useful to be able to listen to while I was driving.
I remember years ago, there is a gentleman by the name of Dr. David Hawkins. Dr. Hawkins was an enlightened person. He's now deceased. He wrote Power versus Force. And he endorsed my first book, which is about how to heal depression naturally. And I remember Dr. Hawkins encouraged me to read A Course in Miracles. And he said, read it on your own. So again, I kind of like the multifactorial approach to learning that you recommend, because it can be so challenging. Now, Corinne, what is the biggest lesson you have learned through your journey with anxiety?
The biggest lesson I've learned from anxiety has been that it's not who I am, and that my small sense of self is not who I am either. That as I, again, turn to my inner guidance system and ask for help and seeing differently, I bring forth experiences that show me that that's what I am. So the anxiety has really taught me that I am not the anxiety, and I'm not even my small self. It's that awareness of this greater self, this greater connectedness, this divine love that we're all a part of. That's where the healing has really happened for me.
I know from working with clients over the years with anxiety, one of the bad things about it is that it is so overwhelming. Mm-hmm. And when it happens, when you're in the middle of a panic attack, it feels so, you just feel powerless to do anything about it. So having tools, whether it's thinking differently or breathing exercises or regular meditation practice, all this can really help us. Now, Corinne, your approach on healing anxiety is chiefly inspired by A Course in Miracles. What is a miracle?
Great question. We've been throwing around this word and not really defining it. So we can think of a miracle in two different ways, and these are both definitions from A Course in Miracles. A miracle is an expression of love. So a miracle is any time that we allow love to flow through us, anytime that we express love to one another's, when we express love to our beloved pets, our loved ones, even just strangers, it's that kindness that's just flowing through us that is a miracle. Now, that's one definition of a miracle. The other definition of a miracle is a shift in perception. So it's a shift in perception from a fearful thought system, which is this thought system based on being these separate bodies and in a world that seems very dangerous. It's a shift from a fearful thought system that tells us that we're alone and separate to a thought system based on love that teaches us that we're not alone, that we're all connected, that we are one, and that we are eternal beings. So that shift in perception from fear to love is a second definition. And that's actually the definition that I focus on mostly in my book, because I was in such a state of suffering for so long. It was that internal, shifting that I really needed. So I focus on that a lot in the book.
Now, again, going back to someone who's just realizing that they have anxiety, just, in the beginning of having panic attacks, and they're feeling powerless. They don't know how to turn the volume down on their suffering. What do you recommend for someone who's at that beginning stage,
So at that very beginning stage, like when the anxiety seems like it's just kicking up and out of control, there are a number of things that we can do. Now, I very much take a balanced approach with, again, like you said earlier on, looking at are there anything that we're doing in our life that is contributing to the anxiety. For instance, for me, I had to cut out caffeine. Caffeine just gave me more shakes and more heart palpitations, and it did nothing good for me. So we have to definitely consider that and eliminate, maybe things that are exacerbating the anxiety. But some of the tools that I recommend, for instance, in our culture, we're told we're supposed to have like tight stomachs, right? So we tend to sort of suck it in and that leads to breathing high up in our chest. When we're stressed and when we're anxious, we're very much usually breathing just from high up in our chest because our belly muscles are super tight. So one of the first things that I'll do is instruct a client. Like, for instance, there have been more than once in the past when I used to work in a particular counseling center on a college campus, occasionally there might be a student having a panic attack in, a stairwell or something like that. And I would go to help them. And the first thing I'd have them do is to put their hand on their belly and one hand on their chest, the other hand on their belly, and just soften their abdominal muscles. Just like a puppy breathes with their whole belly, and just like a baby breathes with their whole belly, when we soften our belly, we're interrupting that tight, constricted breath, and it's putting us back into a state of being able to take a more relaxed breath. And that shift can change our physiology and help the anxiety diminish a little bit. Another example might be, I know that there's things like Bach flower essences and other things that can be helpful for calming when the anxiety is really bad. A Course in Miracles does teach that all healing is at the level of the mind, but it doesn't say you should never take supplements or things, because we have to be where we are. We have to be where we're at. And if we need something, take something. And I like to always teach, if you're going to take something, take it with your inner guide, take it with your inner guidance system, and trust that the need for it will fall away when you're ready to let it go. And that was my experience. So there's things like that we can do. And also, sometimes it's helpful to change our setting. If we're inside our house and we're obsessing and just in a worry loop, get out. Go for a light walk. Go just change your environment, because that can just sometimes help us to get a little bit of relief and get us a little bit more distant from that anxiety cycle.
Yeah. Now, from a brain chemistry perspective, when people are anxious, they're frequently low in gamma aminobutyric acid, GABA. And one of the things that we know from scientific research is that there are practices that can help you raise GABA naturally. You can definitely take GABA as a supplement. I know I've used GABA, for years, for decades with clients of mine who have anxiety, but practicing yoga and meditating are scientifically proven to raise your GABA levels naturally. So if you have problems with ongoing anxiety, in addition to reading the Course in Miracles and changing your mind, changing perspective, you can also develop a regular meditation practice, a regular yoga practice, and one that really focuses not on hot yoga. I wouldn't recommend hot yoga.
Mm-hmm.
I would recommend a calming yoga. Now, Corinne, what is what you call the inner therapist, and does everyone have one?
Good question. So I do talk about this part of our mind called our inner therapist in my book. And the inner therapist, there are many words for this that we can substitute: inner teacher, inner guide, intuition. I just call it your inner therapist because it's the part of our mind that remembers love. A Course in Miracles calls it Holy Spirit. It's the part of our mind that remains connected to our source of love, and therefore it's going to know the way out of anxiety, out of fear. So we make that decision to find our willingness and to turn to our inner therapist to ask for that miracle, to ask for that shift in perception, to have that renewed experience, that actual experience that we are greater than these small cells. So the inner therapist is a part of our own mind that remembers love.
Now, let's also go back to breathing, because Moshe Feldenkrais, who was the founder of Feldenkrais, a system of movement, he said that for every mood that you have, there's a particular posture and there's a particular breathing pattern. So you talked, Corinne, about the shallow breathing that's common in anxiety. And for our audience, I want to point out a free resource. If you go to one of my websites, unlimitedenergynow.com, and actually go to fitness and scroll down, you can look for 8 minutes to inner peace. And this is a series of breathing exercises, 8 different breathing exercises that I actually made videos of years ago when I wanted to help a client with anxiety. So 8 minutes to inner peace, it's a pranayama, a breath work routine. And I like to teach it to my clients with anxiety so that you learn that you have power over your anxiety and that you can turn down the volume on your anxiety. I know that when I feel anxious, that's one of the things that I do, is I do this 8 minutes to inner peace routine, and it's free. And all you got to do is go to unlimitedenergynow.com and watch the videos. So from your perspective, as somebody who's suffered lifelong anxiety, what happens to our breath when we're feeling anxious?
It gets short and shallow. It gets smaller. Again, it's not a complete breath. We're not taking in a lot of oxygen. And I don't mean that our breath should always be big and deep, because then we'll be taking in, maybe a little bit too much oxygen, but it becomes very short and shallow. So finding our natural breathing rhythm again becomes important. So I love that you're offering those breathing practices on your website. That's fantastic.
Now, what sort of breath work do you recommend? Because I know for myself, I taught yoga for 22 years, but when I get anxious, I'm just like, breathe, just something simple, like remember to breathe. What do you recommend, Corinne, when people are in anxiety and panic?
Well, one thing that I've experimented with and my students have also reported that they love, and I don't know who came up with this, I did not, but it's called 4-7-8 breathing, where you breathe in for 4, hold for 7, and then exhale for a count of 8, 4-7-8. That can be, one way, again, just to do that for a few times, just to interrupt that short and shallow breath to get yourself to calm down. So that can be one tool.
can you lead our audience through that so that we'll have an experience? So
Sure.
that, because if we're listening now, we can learn how to do that so that when we feel anxious or panic does come up, we'll know what to do.
Absolutely. So if we just sit quietly, and it's always best if you're sitting to sit straight and have your feet on the floor. You're welcome to lean back if you'd like, whatever's most comfortable for you. If you're listening to this while you're driving, please keep your eyes open. And as we sit here, and you can do this with your eyes open or eyes closed, whatever is most comfortable for you. Just first bring your awareness to the fact that you're already breathing. You don't have to do anything to make this breath happen. It's already there. And actually, before we do the 4-7-8 breathing, I just invite you to place one hand on your chest and the other hand on your belly. Just to connect with your breath, to feel your breath. And to notice, is your belly tight? There should be some movement in that belly with each breath. So all you have to do is just simply soften your abdominal muscles. That's it. We're not changing the breath. We're just softening those abs. And you might notice already a sense of calm. So if you'd like to just relax your hands in your lap, I'm going to count and we're going to breathe in for 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, and hold for 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and exhale for 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And let's do it again. Breathe in for 4, and I'll let you count on your own. Hold for 7, and exhale for 8. Just one more time. Breathe in for 4. Hold for 7, and exhale for a count of 8. And if your eyes are closed, allowing your eyes to open. And lengthening that exhalation activates our parasympathetic nervous system. So that's the opposite of that fight or flight response. So what was that like?
That was beautiful, and we can all just slide our mind and slide our breath into this calm state, and just taking a moment, even just a couple of minutes, like you just led us through, to feel calmer. Now, what role does meditation play in healing from anxiety?
I think meditation is so important. I teach mindfulness meditation, which is all about getting into the present and being aware of our present experience as it's happening. So folks with anxiety might feel like the last thing they want to do or can do is to get quiet and close their eyes. But just like we did, and just like you said, it doesn't have to take very long. It can be 2 minutes or 1 minute. Or if that even feels like too much, we can practice mindfulness as we're going about throughout our day. I'm looking over at my kitchen sink, simply washing one dish at a time, feeling the hot water, the soap, smelling the smell of the soap. Mindfulness is about bringing our attention into doing whatever it is that we're doing. It's the opposite of multitasking. So rather than that sort of scattered, jumping, that monkey mind where we jump from one thing to another, we're intentionally focusing our mind on one thing at a time. And when we notice that our mind wanders, we just choose without judgment to bring it back. So meditation, I believe, is really important, even if it means you can only do it for 60 seconds, or if you're just bringing mindful awareness into everything that you do while you're doing it. It all counts.
I'll never forget years ago, Corinne, in one of my yoga classes, one of my new students at the end of class, she said, I have a question for you. And she came up, she waited till everybody else was gone, and she said, I'm thinking in meditation. And I just laughed, because it's like, this is what we all struggle with, right? So we all struggle to let go of that monkey mind. So what advice do you have for people who are struggling to let go of the monkey mind in when we're meditating?
Stop trying to let it go and accept it. Accept that it's there. It's a normal part of our experience. It's a normal part of having a mind that's very busy and active. And instead of trying to make it go away, we can notice every time it comes up. So there my mind goes again. I'm going to bring it back to my anchor, which might be your breath, or it might be a body scan. So we're going to choose an anchor in our meditation. It might be a positive statement from something like A Course in Miracles. We're going to always come back to our anchor every time our mind wanders, but we have to let go of beating ourselves up for the monkey mind. If we can accept it and acknowledge it that it's there, we can work with it rather than trying to push it out of our experience.
Now, if anyone has ever experienced a panic attack, it's an extremely uncomfortable experience. Not only do you have these obsessive thoughts, your heart races, your breath quickens. It can be you can almost feel like you're having a panic attack. So Corinne, what advice do you have to offer for people who are in the middle of a panic attack?
So any of the, breathing practices that we just talked about, also, a key thing is to remind yourself when you're in the middle of a panic attack that panic happens in time. It happens in time, in linear time. So it's going to have an end. It's not going to last forever. And just reminding ourselves of that can be helpful to keep that in mind. In addition, knowing what it is, naming it, this is a panic attack. This is just anxiety. It's really intense anxiety. It's really uncomfortable. And I'm just acknowledging and accepting that it's happening right now. Because when we don't want it to be happening right now, like the last thing we want is anxiety or a panic attack, but it's happening. And if we're wishing it wasn't happening while it's happening, we're just creating more strain. So if we can just instead say, okay, this is my experience right now. This sucks, but this is happening. And I'm just going to sort of ride that wave of that anxiety. That can help us find our way out.
What is the greatest strength that anxiety sufferers have?
From a Course perspective, this is where A Course in Miracles is influencing my answer on this. We have a very easy time. Our greatest strength as anxiety sufferers is that we have a very easy time recognizing fear. So we're going to feel when we're off, when we have that little twinge of fear, we know it, we feel it. We're really good at acknowledging where that fear is, even if it's subtle. And so what we can do with it then, rather than just ignore it or just not really doing anything about it, we can then repurpose it through the practices that I talk about in the book. I'm all about repurposing things. So giving the purpose of that fear, instead of the purpose of that fear staying in a place of keeping us fearful, if we repurpose it, we're now giving it to our inner guidance system, our inner therapist, and saying, hey, I'm noticing this fear. I would like a miracle instead. I'd like to have an experience of something different instead. So we can then take that fear to that part of our mind and ask for that miracle.
Now, I know that in my work as a medical intuitive, I have very, very, very long lists of fears. And, Englishmen, Germans, men, marriage, death, of course, public speaking. The list of fears that we can experience as humans is ridiculously long. I remember when I studied medical intuition, I remember going in and the teacher said one day, okay, today we're going to get rid of all our fear. And I just laughed. I was like, oh, good. We'll be here all day, and then maybe not, maybe we won't. So what is a not so obvious indication that someone is making progress in healing from anxiety?
Again, my perspective is influenced here by A Course in Miracles, because sometimes we might be making progress, but it actually feels like the fear is kicking up more frequently. From this perspective that I talk about in the book, love is what we are, but we've put blocks of fear in between that love and our awareness of love. So as we start to heal those layers of fear and the love starts to come to the surface, there's part of our mind that can get a little bit freaked out by that, because it fears of losing something, or that we're going to be asked to sacrifice something, or that, life as we know it might change if we go into this like amazing experience of love. So we might actually be making progress with anxiety if it's kicking up a little bit more frequently, but it's nothing to be afraid of, because we're always making progress as we work healing principles.
Now, your beautiful book, From Anxiety to Love, you're talking about a journey from anxiety to love. So how can learning how to love, how can opening ourselves up to be willing to give and receive love, how can learning, how to love unconditionally, how can that help us overcome anxiety?
Well, if love is what we are, if love is eternal, if love is our true nature, again, I go back to that Course quote that perfect love casts out fear. Coming back into, and when I say love, I'm really talking about like the love of the universe, like a divine love, a capital L love. As we come to know that that's who we really are, the anxiety has to fall away, because how can anxiety exist in perfect love? It can't. So as we embrace and know again, and remember, this is something that I believe is in us already. We just have to remember it by removing these fear blocks, that anxiety just has to fall away as we remember the love that we are.
Another guest that we had on the Natural Healing Show, he said, in his opinion, one of the most important questions is asking yourself, who am I? So how can we, in your opinion, Corinne, come to know and experience ourselves as divine love? How do we get there?
That is exactly the process that I'm talking about in the book. That's the process that A Course in Miracles teaches. And it has to do with, again, having experiences of something beyond ourself. So the process, the 3-step process that I talk about in the book, the process that the Course teaches, A Course in Miracles teaches, is about finding our willingness to see differently. This is so key, because we're so caught in our narrow perception of how we see things. We think we've got it all figured out, right? We think we know how everything is and how everything should be. We need some openness in that. We need to embrace this idea that I don't know. I just don't know. So if we're willing to see something differently, we're saying, maybe the way I'm seeing it is not the best way. I'm willing, I'm open. And we can take that willingness and bring it to what I call your inner therapist in our own minds, and say, I want an experience of a miracle. I want that shift in perception. I want that restored sense of peace. So take my willingness to see differently. Help me see differently. And then we trust that it's done. So those are the 3 steps: finding your willingness, giving it over to your inner therapist, and trusting that it's done. And in that trust, what often comes about for me, it was time and time again, I'd have a renewed sense of peace. I'd be struggling with something and I'd work this process that I just described, and peace would return. I would feel that shift. And at the same time, we might go through those steps and it feels like nothing's happening. And that's why I also address a lot of different, aspects of how we can break that 3-step process down a little bit more, because there might be times when we do it and it seems like nothing's happening. And that's just because, we're not ready yet. We're not ready for that shift, perhaps.
So you mentioned that, in your opinion, one of the greatest strengths that anxiety sufferers have is this ability to identify their fears and identify when they're in fear versus in love, right?
Yes.
So what do you most hope that your readers will take away from your beautiful book, From Anxiety to Love?
My hope is that people will take away hope, that no matter how bad things may seem, there's another way. And my hope is that it will really awaken something in readers' hearts that speak to them, to motivate them to want to get to know that part of themselves better.
That's beautiful. And I have a question. How long did you have to read A Course in Miracles? How long did you have to study it before you started experiencing your own shift in reducing the anxiety?
Well, I started feeling like breaths of relief as soon as I started, because there'd be sentences here and there that made a lot of sense to me. But it was a journey for me. And I'm hesitant to tell you how long I've been studying, because it's not going to take, I don't want anybody to think it's going to take them that long. I mean, I started in the 90s, but I know other folks who've been just doing it for a couple years and they've experienced incredible miracles, incredible shifts. So it's not about the length of time that we study, it's about our readiness, and it's about our willingness to release how we see things and be open to a new thought system. That's where the key really comes in, is that readiness.
So Corinne Zupko, licensed counselor and mindfulness-based stress reduction teacher, author of From Anxiety to Love. Any final thoughts for our audience?
I will just offer a sentence from the book that my stepfather actually said to me when I was like knocked out in the fetal position on his couch with, bags under my eyes from just having been in a horrific anxiety period. He said to me, and I say this to you, the light in you is too bright to fail. The light in you is too bright to fail.
Beautiful words. Everyone, thank you so much for listening. This is Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer and Amazon #1 bestselling author. You can find out more about me and my work at catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. Unlimitedenergynow.com is the website where you can watch the free videos, and I've got lots of articles explaining how to do that 8 minutes to inner peace so that you can practice along for free breathing exercises, along with the wonderful one that Corinne taught us today, to turn down the volume on your anxiety. Thanks so much, everybody. And as you shift your perspective, you will experience natural healing. See you next time.